lesson, I'd like to focus very specifically on the past in Spanish, because this is a very important concept to understand. What I'm going to attempt to do is to put you into the mind of a native Spanish speaker and how they actually hear the past. As we know, we've been using arrows to express how the past moves in Spanish. So we have a horizontal line where we are expressing background, what was going on at the time, describing the scene, describing the picture. And then on top of that timeline, we have actions coming down. So this would be the simple past. For example, I was watching TV when he knocked on the door. Now in our verb chart, we have the arrows here to show you the sounds for both of those actions. So these are the sounds for when the simple past is used, this arrow downwards. And the chart below it, these are the sounds for this horizontal line when we are describing the picture or the scene. Now for some of these irregular verbs, these four here, we can continue using the past progressive just as we have been doing with all the other verbs. So estaba haciendo, I was doing or I was making. Estaba diciendo, I was saying. Estaba viendo, I was seeing. Estaba dando, I was giving. But for these other ones above, we want to switch into a different sound, and that sound is called the imperfect in Spanish. So we have quería, querías, quería, or tenía, tenías, tenía, podía, podías, podía. Tends to have that ia sound or an aba sound, as you can see above here. It's very important that you see all the sounds on this chart as describing background. These are the ones that are going in a horizontal line, whereas these ones above are all the sounds when the arrow comes down for these verbs. Now where we have to be particularly careful is if we take something like poder. So here we have the sound of pude, meaning I could or I was able to. But if we go down to the chart below, we have the sound of podía, and now this also means I could or I was able to. So the question is when to use each one, pude versus podía. Let's take this paragraph. It says, it was raining and I was trying to open the door, but I couldn't do it, meaning I wasn't able to do it. A neighbor arrived to help me, and finally, after an hour of trying, I was able to open the door. So here we have two examples of where we're going to use the verb poder in the past. It doesn't matter if you say, but I couldn't do it, or I wasn't able to do it. It's expressing the same thing. Now, if we were to translate this into Spanish, it would read like this. So it was raining, estaba lloviendo. Llover is to rain. So it was raining, estaba lloviendo. And I was trying, y estaba tratando de, to open, abrir, and the door, la puerta. Pero no podía hacerlo. But I couldn't do it or I wasn't able to do it. Then a neighbor arrived. So something happened. Llegó un vecino to help me ayudarme. And finally, y finalmente, after an hour, después, this should be después de una hora of trying. This verb here, intentar, also means to try. So after an hour of trying or trying it, después de una hora de intentarlo, I was able to open the door. So pude abrir la puerta. Now this is a very good example of how Spanish is using the verb poder, to be able to, but it's being used in a very well-defined manner. If you notice that at the beginning, all of this is background. So it was raining and I was trying to open the door, but I couldn't do it or I wasn't able to do it. This is all describing the scene. And remember that whenever we describe background, or describe the scene, we use the horizontal arrow. So this is why we're using the sound of podía. This is what was going on at the time. I was trying, but I wasn't able to do it. Then the story continues. So we have a neighbor arrived to help me, and finally, after an hour of trying, I was able to do it. Now here we have an action, meaning I succeeded in opening the door. This is why Spanish switched into pude, because here we have the action of me being able finally to open the door. So we have pude here. So on this part of the story, you're seeing all horizontal line, what was going on at the time. This is why we have podía. And then at the end, we have a piece of action of the door actually being opened. I was able to do it. So Spanish switched into the sound of pude to express that definitive action of being able to open the door. This is why with some verbs, we must be very careful and always keep in mind, are we talking about this arrow or this one? Because the sound changes depending on what it is you're visualizing in your mind. This is why at the start of the video, I mentioned that I was going to try to put you into the mind of a native Spanish speaker. This is what they're hearing in the difference between pude and podía. It's very important that you bear in mind that the nature of the simple past, or the preterite, as it's also known, so this is where the arrow is going straight down. The nature of these sounds is that it's done, it's over, the action is finished, and there's no going back. For example, if you imagine hanging up the phone, well, it's done, you've hung up the phone, there's no going back. It's an action that's completed. Or the same thing with turning on a light switch. Once you turn it on, it's on, that's it, the action is over. This is what happens when you use the simple past, this downward arrow. This is how it's understood, meaning that the action is over, there's no going back. Here's another example for you where we'll compare them both side by side in a simple phrase. So it reads, I couldn't understand what he was saying to me. So in both we're using the verb poder, I couldn't understand or I wasn't able to understand. So in the first one, in Spanish we could have no podía entender lo que me estaba diciendo. Where in the second one we have no pude entender lo que me estaba diciendo. Now here's how I want you to visualize both of those examples. In the first one, with the sound of podía, we have the horizontal line. So by using podía, you are talking about background. You're describing the scene. This is what was going on. Whereas with pude, you're making a very definitive statement. The action is closed. So now, if you said this first one to the ears of a native Spanish speaker, they would still be waiting for you to finish. Like, okay, well, you weren't able to understand what he was saying to you, but what happened? Okay, well, did you ask him to slow down, or did you ask him to repeat it again? You know, what happened? In other words, they're still waiting for you to finish telling them what happened because you've used podía. You're telling them the scene. Whereas in this second example, if you say no pude entender, to their ears, now what you were saying is you couldn't understand and you didn't understand. There's nothing more to tell. After it was all said and done, you couldn't understand what he was saying. This is where you get the arrow down. It's important to realize that both options are perfectly correct in Spanish, but what they convey or how you will be understood to the ears of a native Spanish speaker are two very different things. In one case with the line, this sound of podía, the line is open. They're waiting for you to finish the story. But with no pude, it's closed. What you're saying is, I couldn't understand what he was saying to me. I didn't understand what he was saying, and that's it. This again is what I mean by the simple past. It's like hanging up a telephone or turning on a light switch. The action is done, it's finished, there's no going back. If we take another comparison, this time we'll switch verbs to querer, and on the arrow downwards, we have the sound of quise, I wanted. With the arrow going across, we have the sound of quería. Literally, I was wanting, but it's not very common that we would say that in English. So in Spanish, we have two sounds for I wanted. It can either be quise or quería, again, depending on what it is you want to express. Let's compare it with this sentence. So we have, I wanted to buy it yesterday. So you could say, quería comprarlo ayer, or quise comprarlo ayer. Both are perfectly correct. When you say quería, you're again creating in the mind of the native Spanish speaker this horizontal arrow. So what they are understanding is that, okay, you wanted to buy it yesterday, but did you? They're not sure. They just know that you wanted to buy it yesterday, but they're not sure what actually happened, if you did or not. Whereas if you use the simple past quise, so now we have the action coming down, what they will understand with quise is that you wanted to buy it and you did in fact buy it. There's nothing more to tell. So in this one, we have an open ... whereas in this one it's closed. Let's move to another example. Let's say I wanted to convince them. So you could say quería convencerlos. This is the horizontal line across. But again, in the ears or to the ears of a native Spanish speaker, they're still waiting for you to tell them what happened. So they're thinking, okay, you wanted to convince them, but then what happened? You know, were you able to? Did you succeed or did you fail? They're waiting for you to finish it. So quería convencerlos. This is background describing the scene, what was going on. Whereas switching to quise, now what you are expressing is that you wanted to convince them and you did in fact convince them. This is the arrow going down. That's it. It's a full stop. There's nothing more to tell. As you can see from these examples, the correct option to go for very often depends on what it is that you yourself are visualizing in your mind. Let's take one more example here. I didn't want to fight him. So you could say, no quería pelear con él, or no quise pelear con él. Both are perfectly correct in Spanish. But with no quería, you're telling a story, you're creating this arrow. Okay, you didn't want to fight with him, but then what happened? Did you fight with him? Or, you know what, I'm waiting for you to tell me what happened, because it's open, you haven't closed it. The listener doesn't know whether you succeeded in this or not, because you're simply describing the scene, not what actually happened in the end. Switching to the sound of no quise pelear con él, now you've created this action downwards. You didn't want to fight with him, and you didn't fight with him. Again, there's nothing more to say. That's the end of the story. You didn't want to fight with him, and you didn't fight with him. In this one, we don't know how it ends. It's open. Let's look at a final example here. So we're going to compare saying tuve que with tenía que. So tuve, meaning I had to, is on this side of the simple past. You can see the sound is right here. So tuve is I had, but tuve que, I had to. Then on the horizontal line, describing the scene, we have the sound of tenía. So tenía que. Let's contrast these. So we're going to use the sentence of, they told me that I had to buy it. Again, you have a choice here in Spanish. You can say, me dijeron que tenía que comprarlo. They told me that I had to buy it. Or you could say, me dijeron que tuve que comprarlo. Which one you choose depends not on some grammatical rule, but what it is that you are visualizing in your mind. So here, because you're using the sound of tenía que, here you can see tenía, you're describing background. So they told you that you had to buy it. That's open. They're waiting for you to finish it. Well, did you buy it or did you not? What happened? Because you could continue by saying, well, they told me that I had to buy it, but when I went to the store, it was too expensive and I couldn't afford it. So you can see here that this is why this is describing the background. They told you that you had to buy it, but in the end, you didn't because it was too expensive. So this is all background. This is why they're using the sound of tenía que. Whereas in this other example, by saying tuve que, okay, now you're creating the downwards arrow, meaning that they told you that you had to buy it, and that's it. It's the end of the story. You did in fact buy it. This is how it will be understood by a native Spanish speaker. Here's one more for you. I didn't go out last night because I had to study. So you could say, no salí anoche. I didn't go out last night. This is action completed. You didn't go out. Reason why, porque I had to study. Tenía que estudiar. Now what is happening by using tenía que? Well, you could continue the story by saying, well, because I had to study, but then there was a knock at the door and a friend came over and we ended up watching a movie all night. So this description is part of the background. What actually ended up happening is that you didn't study at all because a friend came over and you ended up watching a movie. If you were to switch over to the sound of no salí anoche porque tuve que estudiar, now that's the end of the story. You couldn't go out because you had to study, and you did in fact study. Nothing else happened. So you see, this is closed. It's no longer background information. It's what actually happened. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, what we're talking about here is really a concept in Spanish, and it does take a while to get used to it. In other words, over time, as we do more and more translations, you'll likely see the same concept in Spanish repeating over and over and over again until eventually it becomes second nature for your own Spanish as well, just like it is for a native Spanish speaker. A key thing to take away from what we've discussed in this video is that you see the simple past as this arrow downwards. It's game over. It's like hanging up a phone or turning on a light switch or putting the key in the ignition of a car and turning it. The action is done, there's no going back. However, when you are talking about the past in Spanish, you must be very aware of what you're doing. Are you describing a background action? Or are you describing this where it comes straight down? This is what you should be visualizing in your mind. On one slide, the sounds are open, you're describing the scene, and on the other side, the sounds are closed, the action is finished.